Hey guys, so I know it's early, but some of us are hoping for another ban list sometime soon. So as usual, I wanted to survey the community, you guys, and gather your thoughts in terms of what you think will actually happen on the next Forbidden Limited list. So definitely a huge thanks to all of you who responded and shared the survey. 600 players responded, which is definitely a pretty big turnout compared to the last one. So you can definitely check me out on Twitter to make sure not to miss out on future surveys. And as always, definitely go check out my discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Sleeves as well as singles. Also want to highlight that, of course, Tier 0 Games and also Card Brawlers, they do have their singles up for pre-order for Battles of Legend, and you can use code AKUNA5 for 5% off. So let's just start with the results, and as usual, I just want to provide a quick overview of the player base that responded. About 80% basically were either semi-competitive or competitive, semi-competitive being at least going to locals regularly, and competitive, you know, those who will go to regionals and maybe even YCS level events. So let's just start with the survey, and we start with prosperity, and so about a quarter think it will get limited on the next list. So this one's kind of interesting because previously, back when Unchained and Rescue Ace, they were tier 1, this was definitely on everyone's radar, hoping that it will get finally hit. And then, you know, once the Snake Eye format started, because they're not really playing Prosperity, I think the calls for hits for this technically did decline a little bit. But now, with Tenpai Dragons kind of coming into the mix and they can OTK through Prosperity's, you know, half damage kind of clause, and so I think at this point hopefully it does actually go away because it just really improves consistency a little too much, especially for just like the better tier 1 decks, and particularly going first post side. Then you have Talents. This is a card that's very, very popular right now because it's a very heavy hand trap format. And of course, I think, you know, in terms of going second and being able to take the opponent's monster, I think that part is really nice. And just being able to find other additional ways to board break. But at the same time, I think where the going first and ripping out a card from your opponent's hand after they hand trap you and getting extra punish, I think that's where Talents gets a little too strong. But I guess for now, maybe most people don't think anything will change. So next we have D-Barrier, which of course is a card that really should have been banned a long time ago. I mean, we've been calling for hits for this for quite some time. You know, you have something like, let's say, Artifact Scythe, where it got banned basically a lot after it was really a big problem. So maybe we'll see this thing with D-Barrier, but you know what, about 19% predicting it will get banned. But you know what, a quarter thinking it will get limited, which I guess, you know, it's something. Maybe it's better than having it at 3. Of course, it is something you can set off of Thrust, but at the same time, Thrust isn't actually all that popular now as it was a year ago in that WCQ format. So I guess I could kind of see why people would think maybe at the very least it get limited. Then we have Skilled Rain, which is definitely a card that should not have come back to 3, and at the very least, you know, it should be limited like some of the other floodgates that we've seen. But you know what, maybe along the lines of something like Summon Limit, maybe it will actually get forbidden as well, at least at some point. So next we have Appaloosa, which, you know, at this point I think it's actually quite realistic to think that this will get banned because we now have seen something like Baronne Savage, you know, those generic extra deck monsters get banned, and I think Appaloosa, you know, it was in the most recent rarity set too, so maybe that's why it wasn't banned. But at this point, you know, they kind of got most of their money's worth, I'm sure, so perhaps it is actually reasonable to predict for this card to get banned, especially with something like Ostinato, which we'll get to shortly, where, you know, some decks that can use that as a package, it leads to a very easy Appaloosa. And then you have SP, which honestly at this point no one's really predicting to get hit in terms of at least banned. 11%, 12% thinking it will get limited. I don't really think that's reasonable at this point either. I mean, back when Rescue Ace was tier 1, when SP first came out, yes, those decks were playing SP at 2, and the second one was kind of needed. And maybe at that point, if it was right now, it would make sense to at least limit it. But at this point, I don't think in this current format, pretty much everyone's just playing it at 1 anyways if they are playing it. Then you have IP Masquerena, which actually 17% think it will get banned. I guess I've definitely seen the predictions for IP kind of floating around. I guess just a quick effect to be able to link it to something like SP and banish, you know, like an opponent's monster or rather card, and also or going into something like Appaloosa on the opponent's turn on top of the kind of card destruction protection that it does provide, especially, you know, IP being so popular in Snake Eye decks with Flame Verge. Putting in the spell trap zone perhaps is actually one of the reasons why definitely a big chunk think it will get banned. So now moving on to the more archetype specific cards, starting with Snake Eye Ash, you know, a big chunk, 60% basically predicting it will get limited. I mean, a lot of people thought this way as well for the list that we just had. At the same time, you know, of course, this card is getting reprinted as an ulti in the next OTS pack, so it probably won't get banned, at least not right now. Of course, you know, there's nothing to say that it won't get banned in the future, but for now, I think at the very least should survive the list, at least at 1. Compare that to something like Snake Eye Oak, where actually about 17%, 16% think it will get forbidden, and then Poplar, where more so about a quarter will think it would get limited instead. Now, of course, Poplar kind of has become its own category at this point. For example, just a card that will be able to summon itself when it's added, not drawn, and then also searching something on the summon. You know, for example, like Tenpai Dragons are getting another new card in Infinite Forbidden that's basically sort of quote-unquote Poplar. So that's kind of like the trend that we're seeing potentially moving forward with like card design, for example. But you know what, Poplar is definitely very, very strong, and perhaps something at least does have to get addressed, of course, within any of the Snake Eye and Diabellstar wanted cards. So Flamberge, of course, 28% predicting it will get banned. I mean, it is pretty reminiscent of Block Dragon for sure, you know, during that Adamantipator format, which we never really got to experience in person because I was at the beginning of the pandemic period. But you know what, that card was absolutely insane in Adamantipator, just being at the plus on their own turn and then also on the opponent's turn, which you're also seeing with Flamberge Dragon every time it hits the grave. So definitely really strong. Limited, about a third predicting it get limited. I don't know, I thought a lot of them were playing at 1 anyways, or 2, but I think to have actual meaningful impact, it would have to get banned. So then we also have Original Sinful Spoils. Of course, this is one of the earlier cards that made the generic fire support so strong, and of course 17% predicting it will get forbidden, whereas you have something like Wanted where half think it will get limited. Definitely, I believe a big chunk felt this way leading up to the list that we just had as well, and I believe the OCG also hit this card too. And then you also have Promethean Princess as another fire support that is definitely very strong, about 10 to 11% predicting it will get banned. You know, just be able to constantly revive, and also not to mention it is generic to go into, and then of course being able to pop as well. I mean, it is a little bit kind of similar to, like, for example, Sprite Elf, where it is able to like just like revive bodies from the grave. Just a very, very strong recursion effect. I mean, obviously probably not as good as Sprite Elf, but at the same time, you know, that was banned pretty early as well since release. And Promethean Princess, maybe not right now, but maybe sometime in the future, if fire decks are still consistently very, very strong, maybe this is definitely another candidate. So then we have Kieran, which honestly doesn't really see much prediction in terms of whether it will get hit. I mean, a while back when I did this a few months ago, back when Fire King was also tier 1, at that point a lot of people thought Kieran would get limited, but at this point Fire King variant definitely took a big step back, and so I guess not much really people expecting this to get hit. And then you have Zealantis, which is funny because when I put this a few months ago, definitely a lot of people thought it was kind of silly to have this on. But now, you know what, almost a quarter predicting it would get banned. Definitely makes OTKs really, really easy in those fire decks. And definitely, I'm not sure if it would actually get banned, but it is, I guess, at least not something to sleep on. And then you have Sangan summoning about 16%, thinking it would get limited. I really don't think so, because, you know, of course, they're also getting more support in Infinite Forbidden. We have like the WCQ format, especially NAWCQ, where Infinite Forbidden is also going to be legal. And I don't think they would hit something like Tempai Dragons that early. Then you also have Branded Fusion, which, I mean, you know what, up until now, they've always been very, very generous in terms of hits for branded decks. So I don't really think this will get hit right now. It's definitely worth considering in the future, though, as it becomes more of a problem at that point. But I think for now it's probably safe, because I think what they really should hit is whatever stops the Gimmick Lock. For the Puppet Nightmare itself was about 27% predicting to get banned, but really I think that's not really worthwhile, because you should just ban Sanctify instead, and 60% predicting to get banned. Definitely one of the more surefire things that was on this prediction. And then you have Ostinato, which, you know, Melodious, pure Melodious at least, definitely a solid tier 2 contender right now. I think more so as a package maybe is where some of the concern might be coming from. Although, as I mentioned earlier, for example, Melodious Snake Eye, that variant has really seen a decline in play as well. And Ostinato, of course, on its own is quite strong, and 15% predicting it would get limited. But you never know, maybe if they, for example, hit Appaloosa, and that makes it less generic for some of the other decks to use it as an engine. And then you also have Fenrir. I kind of gave up on this one at this point. I mean, it is very, very strong. Probably should get limited. I think it was actually banned in the OCG, if I'm not mistaken. So you know what? Perhaps it survives another one. But it is something that's pretty strong and seeing in Tempai Dragons a lot as well. So perhaps they would actually hit it this time. Next, you have Dimension Shifter, about 21% thinking it will get banned. I thought it would actually be higher. Perhaps people at this point have just kind of given up now on, you know, Konami hitting Shifter. So this is a card that I believe in every format other than the TCG, they have hit it in some fashion, at least to, for example, 2. And I'll take that, honestly. I'll take anything at this point. I think a lot of us would. So, I mean, I think it also depends on how hard Snake Eye is hit as well. And I do think that, you know, if you were to, for example, ban Shifter, then that does mean, I think, you know, you would have to hit a lot of different cards as well. And also in terms of future card design as well, because there's not Shifter, you know, kind of holding certain decks and strategies back. You know, you probably have to kind of consider that, but who knows. And then kind of similar to the lines of Shifter, but not nearly as oppressive, I find, is also Droll, because definitely a lot of people were kind of calling for hits to this as well, in terms of all these kind of lingering effects, right? Like Droll, Shifter, D-Bear, things like that, where you can't really stop in a lot of instances. But it looks like most people don't actually expect anything to change for Droll. Moving on to some of the runic cards, you do have Tip, which, 12% thinking will get limited. We are seeing still a decent amount of runic stun decks, enough to be at a tier 2 status. It's still topping YCS level events as well. Definitely not fun to play against, and runic being able to draw so much, I do hope that if they hit some of these other tier 1 strategies, I hope they finally do a more bigger hit to the runic stuff. And then you also have Labyrinth stuff. Really, most people not really expecting any changes in terms of big welcome as well as regular welcome. But the funny thing is, Hot Dragon Calamity, 67% basically predicting to get banned, which basically makes it the highest percentage among all the cards listed in this survey. And it is true, it should be banned. I doubt it would, just because Centurion, it is still at the rogue level. And of course, there are some other synchro strategies I've been trying to kind of incorporate the Centurion package. For example, Vanadium has done it. That's top regional. Same with even Lightsworn. And they are also all gearing towards Calamity Lock, which is incredibly strong. But until I think the deck is like tier 1, I don't think Konami would ban it, just how they took a while to ban something like, let's say, Calamity, VFD, as well as even Numeron's Excellent. They were kind of like in that tier 1 conversation and actually got banned also much later after it was a problem, and I don't think they would do that for Calamity, even though they should. And then in terms of other potential unlimited cards right now that players mentioned in the free text, Crossout Designator came up a lot actually to 1, which is kind of interesting. It's definitely seeing a lot of play, especially in like hand trap heavy formats, and not to mention when you have a lot of Snake Eye and Top Cut, especially at premier level events, it also makes that very, very strong in the mirror. So kind of similar to how Call by the Grave was limited, perhaps players are also hoping that this card would also get limited, just because being able to stop hand traps, it does make tier 1 decks a lot stronger than it does help with rogue decks. Super Poly is another one that people are asking for it to be to go to 1. Right now, Super Poly actually is not that amazing because it's not that great against Snake Eye, but perhaps this is more of a preemptive stuff for like Yubel. I'm not too sure. And then Deck Lockdown is just another floodgate that has been pretty popular lately, and along with the likes of Skill Drain, like Anti-Spell Fragrance and what have you, perhaps another card that should get banned. Moving on to the limited and semi-limited section, we do have Call by the Grave. Honestly, the distribution for this really hasn't changed much. I think it really should probably stay the same. Same thing for Misk. I think people have given up hope, but you know what? I think this will eventually come back to, at the very least, to relatively soon. And then you have Anti-Spell Fragrance, which of course recently got limited, which honestly didn't make sense if they were also banning Summon Limit in that same list. I think Anti-Spell was also in the rarity set as well, or one of the whatever reprints, so maybe that's why it survived, but this card should definitely also get banned, especially the fact that it completely just kills the pendulum mechanic. Not that anyone's really playing it, but at the same time, I guess Melodious stuff technically, but you know what, I really do think this card should finally go away. Next we have Rivalry, which is definitely another one that was limited, which is a good start, but I do think that it's another one where perhaps we should consider for it to be forbidden, because especially it's been very, very strong in the current format, which is kind of funny because with like archetype based decks that we run in the modern days, you would think most would be the same type, but nowadays not so much. And so Rivalry definitely a strong one, and same thing can be said for There Can Be Only One, even though it's not actually that amazing right now, but you know what, in future formats it will definitely be strong again. It really, I think, flips back and forth. And then also Goes a Match, definitely the least seen among the 3, but can also be very, very strong too. And then you have Runic Fountain, which of course is right now at 2. I don't think you should be able to draw like 6 in the same turn, just because this is not a hard once per turn. And again, I think it kind of depends on what other decks are actually hit, but I do think, Konami tends to not really like draw cards, which they have typically limited. At the same time, Engage is of course a kind of an exception to that, because they actually brought it back all the way to 3, which is a little interesting and maybe a little unconventional for them to do. But you know what, hopefully Runic Fountain also kind of sees its play at only 1. Some of the other potential hits, or rather releases, for the limited and semi-limited Pankratops. Beatrice, this one was my bad. I thought I had actually included in the survey, but turns out I missed out on it. So this is a card that a lot of people are asking to be banned. I think more so preemptive as well, just because of something like Fiendsmith stuff. Honestly, even leading up to this format, this was a card that was potentially, a card for banning because of, like, for example, transaction rollback. That of course never ended up being as big of a problem as maybe some may have thought, but Beatrice, I do think that will get banned at some point for sure. And then people asking for Naturia Sacred Tree to come back. Of course, this got limited because of all the runic Naturia stuff going on. Was quite strong, especially popular during that tier 0 tier limit format, just to kind of hang in there. And of course, if runic stuff does get hit as well, then I'm sure Sacred Tree can come back too. And then moving on to the final ban section, we have Max T as usual, just kind of tradition, 95%. It's usually around there all the time, so people are pretty adamant about this one staying banned. And then you have Masterpiece. This originally kind of became a little bit of a popular candidate in terms of coming back, just because, you know, hey, if X-Perlane War is legal, then why can't Masterpiece? I mean, maybe you could make an argument for that, but I think it's just better for the game if it just stays on the ban list. Then you have Electromite, which of course I think a lot of people probably gave up hope on this, but at the same time, I mean, I gave up hope on Colossus and that came back, even Engage came back. So I think Electromite, especially with the lack of play of Pendulums, perhaps, I'm sure will come back at some point too. And then you have Kick Kalos, 20% think it would come back to 1. I think it kind of depends, especially if, like, for example, Shifter gets banned or hit in some way, that just kind of default makes Tear Element stronger again, and I'm not really sure if Konami wants to bring this back again, at least this soon. And then you also have Pranky Meow Meow Mew. This one, over half thinking it would come back to 1. This did get hit because along with like the adventure stuff at the time, 2 years ago, it was incredibly strong, very consistent for them to have a Link 1. And a Link 1 that's actually pretty good too, allowing for like double Regeki with like Butler, for example. So can it come back? I think so. I'm not sure about right now. I mean, the adventure engine definitely does not see that much play anymore at all. It is kind of considered as kind of bricky at this point because it's like a 9-10 card engine. So who knows? Maybe it does come back. Definitely would make the Prank Kid players happy because that deck has completely disappeared and is not even at the rogue status at this point. So next we have Dryden, which I actually do think can come back, but you know, because it was banned 2 separate times, perhaps Konami would be a little bit more cautious bringing it the 3rd time. They don't want to make repeated mistakes perhaps, but I don't think it's that really incredibly strong anymore. I do think that it can come back. And then you have Heavy Storm. This did come back for the OCG, so I think that's where kind of like this prediction is coming over half actually thinking it will come back to 1. You know, we do have Feather Duster. That in itself was actually a huge surprise. Some would argue Heavy Storm might be even better depending on the deck that can play, where you want to blow up your own back row. So you know what, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that this can come back. In terms of other potential releases, Summon Sork and Plushfire. Plushfire especially, there was a recent errata announced, and Summon Sork, of course, the errata was announced a couple months ago, and I think it's really bound to happen for us and come back. Mathmech Circular, that's kind of interesting. That hit was definitely out of the blue. Perhaps they bring it back at some point. I'm not sure. Now, in terms of the satisfaction level for the current format, you know, essentially 70% saying they're either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, which is definitely a lot higher than what we saw last time. And, you know, I think based on like what you're seeing on Twitter, especially right now with a lot of people complaining about Yu-Gi-Oh!, I don't think this result is that much of a surprise. In terms of, you know, how you enjoy this format compared to the previous format, this one's kind of funny because the distribution is usually pretty similar, so I just feel like, you know, of course this format there's definitely a lot to complain about, but I think we always are never really satisfied with the current format compared to the previous format in a lot of instances. Next, in terms of when the ban list will actually be released and also take into effect, so 18% think it would be before the first WCQ, which is basically next week by the time this video is out. So I don't think that's really likely because you have to definitely give people time to essentially get the cards in time, and it's just not enough for 1 week. And now in terms of before the NAWCQ though, which is July 19th, that one, of course, now Infinite Forbidden is also coming out, and so perhaps that is feasible. Some may argue, well, you know what, they're probably going to try to have the WCQ happen in the same kind of format to make it fair, but that argument is already out the window because Infinite Forbidden is going to be legal for the NAWCQ, but it's not legal for the Central and South American WCQs anyways. And then, of course, you know, either that, the most, I guess, kind of the more predicted version is the after all the WCQs are complete, after the European one, and then, you know, before Worlds, basically. So, you know what, it's kind of interesting to see when it would come out. I think if we didn't see Snake Eye take up so much of the top cut even after that last ban list we just had, I don't think anyone would have expected a ban list to come out before the NAWCQ, but at this point, because it's still such a clear tier 0 deck, and especially with Snake Eye being able to combine with something like Fiendsmith, for example, perhaps it is maybe not that unreasonable to ask for a ban list before NAWCQ and where Infinite Forbidden becomes legal. Alright guys, so that was it for the balance prediction survey results. Hopefully you found that interesting, and definitely a big thanks to all of you who did respond to the survey. Hopefully you continue to participate in those as we move forward. Big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to all my patrons and sponsors as well for the continued support, and well, take care guys.